Welcome to another episode of Out of the Fire podcast, the only podcast on the internet that talks about fire consistently. There's other healthcare, digital health podcasts, but this one consistently talks about fire. So you can keep tuning in and checking it out. Subscribe on all the different platforms. Today we have Dave Pyke and Jason Vogt. The thing you guys are working on right now, the fast fire initiatives, including security, consent, and Jason, amazing stuff you're doing with the CMS aligned networks and Kill the Clipboard. Excited to have this conversation.
Dave, you go first.
I'll go first. All right. Dave Pyke, I'm an independent consultant. I am the FAST technical director. I've been working on that for about 3 years. Also, in my spare time, I'm the technical SPE for TEFCA. I also work for various organizations on special projects regarding interoperability. I'm on the technical steering committee of the HL7 and do odds and sods other things on the side.
Yeah, and Jason Vogt. I am a manager of our structured document and API development team here at Meditech. And the other hats I also wear is I'm the FAST security co-chair. I also sit on the steering committee of FAST and the Argonaut Accelerator. Heavily involved in the Argonaut Accelerator, Da Vinci, burden reduction space. And then my other hat I wear is the TEFCA Fire
Implementation Advisory Group.
Implementation Advisory Group, helping steer the TEFCA Fire roadmap as well.
And 32 other hats he doesn't have time to list.
Plus CMS aligned networks and other things. I have a day job too, I guess.
Isn't that great when you can have a day job and you get to do all this fun, cool stuff? That's really awesome.
It's a blessing and a curse, I feel like, because then I feel like they actually ask me to do things at work, and then I'm like, oh yeah, let me find some time for that.
I always have lots of free time between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m.
Yeah. You always find time for stuff that you really want to do, right? So, okay, well, let's get into it. What would you say? So CMS obviously is putting real weight behind CMS aligned networks. And why is fast security, according to what basically we've seen out there, is so important to that, right? We see now with the new CMS interoperability and prior auth for drugs proposed rule. I believe fast security is part of that. Like, why do you guys feel like that's a central part of all of these new regulations?
I think primarily because we're solving a problem that's been around since fire really took off, which is trying to get security to scale. We've had basic OAuth, which was profiled as smart on fire, which is a wonderful system, but it has a human step. And anytime a human has to make a decision, has to make a technical change, that adds time and makes scaling much more difficult. With fast security, we have the dynamic client registration, which is based on an OAuth RFC, and take the human out of the process. So once they get enrolled into TEFCA or to a network that has set up a trust community, it's over. You get a cert and everything is automatic. They take that cert, they take the software statement, and they get the client ID, and then they go through standard OAuth, authentication authorization. And that's so much faster and less resource requirements than any other thing. So if we're going to make fire scale out to hundreds of thousands of organizations, we need to make sure that they can connect to each other without having to send an email or a phone call or any kind of human intervention, as long as we are comfortable with who they are and that they've agreed to be a good player on the network.
Yeah, and Dave mentioned like the trust piece there. I feel like that's where like we really get a lot of technical trust in this fast security IG, and that's really what the networks have been kind of lacking across the industry, right? Is like we've been able to establish trust in how to do document exchange at scale, but we haven't been able to establish that trust in the fire ecosystem. And I think that's where the fast security IG really sets that base standard to say, okay, we can not only can we do this at scale, but we can do it in a very trusted fashion. And once you have a client add a fire endpoint, we also have the next steps in that process as well. It's like, how are you going to get a token? How are you going to get an authorization code? Or when a user or patient needs to get access versus a system needs to get access. And having those very defined rules of the road across a community or a trust network is crucial to really scale fire to where we want it to be.
That's a great description of why fast security is so important. How does it support both B2B and B2C use cases? Essentially, we have a big problem in healthcare, and I had a great conversation with Michael Westover a while back about how healthcare just runs on these, CSV extracts and FTP sites. And so like 90, probably 99% of all healthcare organizations just exchange CSV files, right? And we have all of these other standards that they could have used. They chose CSV because it's probably the simplest, right? Or at least the simplest to the decision makers or the business people that set up the relationships. And so, first of all, like, I guess my biggest question is like, how do we get away from that? But also the B2C question is that we also want to address the, to consumer use cases that actually own a lot of this data that I always talk about when I was at UPMC and I ran a quality analytics team and I created all of this. My team created all of this amazing analytics and quality measurement analysis, and none of that would go to the patient, right? None of that would go to the member, right? So that was all for some executive that said the 100-person quality reporting team, but none of that would be actually shared with the patient. So, like, how does this arrangement change that equation where you can exchange data between organizations and then also the consumer can actually identify themselves and download all of this information that is compiled by the healthcare system, right?
I think the biggest way that makes the difference is the fact in standard OAuth, you're just kind of saying, here's my user ID and password, let me in, which works if you're going to Google to do a search and you just want to tie it together. When we get to patient data, we need more information. And that's why, as part of fast security, there's extensions. So in the IG, we define a basic B2B extension just to say, hey, I'm from this organization. I'm this user, I'm here for this purpose of use, I'm here for, and on and on. And that really makes it so that it's not just John Smith is logging in. It's this person who has this right to access the data with these, this user ID, all of this can be included in that. And that's not part of basic OAuth. So you can take that. You can still use it, unfortunately, to exchange a CSV if you really want to, but it makes it so that Fire becomes a much more effective way because we take the smart scopes, right? So it's personalized to Fire, it's personalized the information, it's personalized to patient if need be. And then you can have other extensions, such as one that declares who the patient is. It includes an OIDC token saying, hey, here's all my demographics, I'm me. And on top of that, they could still have their credentials, a user ID and password, because they've been to that site before to use the portal. All of this becomes part of the basic workflow without a lot of extra work, and it's portable. So when you create that information, the software statement is part of registration, the basic extension as part of the uh, authorization. You can use these right across. And then when you get to, authentication, that's when you get into fine detail. And that makes a huge difference, both in the B2B and the consumer world.
Yeah, it's really building off of those standards too, right? Like in a lot of like what we're really good at right now in Fire is going point to point, right? Like I have an app, I go to this organization, I get a client ID, right? Like fast security says, okay, well, if you're part of a trust community, here's your certificate, and you can go to any organization in that community and get a client ID. Okay, now the next question is, okay, I'm going to get a client ID. What am I going to do with it? Or what am I supposed to do with it? Okay, well, I'm doing a treatment use case. I'm doing an individual acts of service or patient access use case. Okay, now here's the next step of rules of the road for that, right? Okay, I'm going to do system to system or business to business, right? Okay, that's more of a client credential grant workflow. This is how we would handle that with your client ID and your client assertion. Okay, I'm doing more of a patient access one. Okay, we're still going to fall back to that authorization workflow that's part of smart and part of OAuth 2.0, but we're going to have some very specific guardrails to make sure that you get there in a scalable fashion. Like what what actually goes across the wire, right? It could technically be that CSV file. Most people want to use Fire, so like we're expecting it to be Fire, but it really just helps to establish those rules so that we can get to it faster. And like you don't have to go organization by organization or even vendor by vendor, right? Like you don't have to go to each EHR and say, okay, how do I get a client here? Like you could technically go to TEFCA and say, I want to access all 10 plus QHINs at once. Okay, here's your credential, your certificate. now go out and get access to everything. And that's the vision, right? Is you get it a lot easier onboarding, and those rules of the road are very clear and they're scalable in a way that they haven't been previously.
And that's why, you see it both in the Aligned Networks documentation. And of course, TEFCA has adopted it as the security method for fire right across the network because it scales. And we don't want to have everybody have to go through a manual process one-on-one to get fire exchange going on to, a huge network.
Right. And like all of us see the friction of like, even if you're connected to Tefka, there's still like the individual, I guess there's in the individual logins. And I think that's a separate problem from the trust and authorization, right? Like the trust like lets you get on the network period, right? And allow you to connect to and search. And then there is like the other different methods of how you can actually retrieve that data. Where do you think like that alignment is between, I think the CMS aligned networks, then you have Tefka, and then you also have the DaVinci part of the prior auth. Like, how do they all combine together? It's like fast security is like really meant to address all of them, or
Yeah. So I
what
think
is the difference?
I think for it is a catalyst for all of them. I think as in the CMS aligned network, right, they really sort of talk about digital identity and how can we fit that into the workflow. And that's where we the fast security community are working with the TEFCA community, who's also working with the CMS community to say, okay, what does that framework actually look like, right? Like they have this, an idea, maybe is it a token exchange type workflow or not, right? Which kind of takes the patient out of the workflow, which maybe isn't a good thing, versus, okay, can we inject that into an authorization based workflow that allows us to better facilitate that and keep the patient in the mix if they need to do a second factor authentication to make sure that the match is accurate, or that, okay, at this organization they want to authorize slightly different data because they're only really looking for a certain lab result from here, or whatever the use case may be. That ability to try to like piece those together and use that digital identity to solve the authentication problem, but also keep the patient in the mix for the authorization workflow is very important. And like we have, between a few different extensions and other guardrails, we have the ability to help manage that. And that's kind of what's next for the community, is like, let's solve this. If that can fit into the next version of the fast security guide, we absolutely will do that so that we can help further constrain those guardrails so that the communities, as we call them, TEFCA, etc., can utilize them to help facilitate agnostic exchange.
Great. I see that the fast security is on ballot for the HL7 Fire Connectathon and coming up here in May. So, Dave, are you thinking this is like more of a global standard that we can adopt across,
Yeah.
national boundaries almost? And what is the thought there?
Well, I mean, fast security started off as a project under ONC as UDAP, United Data Access Protocols. And it was brought to HL7. And because it started off under ONC, it was limited to US realm, so US use only. We've realized it's an OAuth profile, and there is nothing inherently American about OAuth that I'm aware of. Once we got a lot of the work done to remove the US specific things, right? Because there was US specific terminologies in there that didn't need to be, because it could be anything. Once we got all that out and could simply say, you know what, this applies anywhere in the world, we went to HL7 and said, we'd like to make this a universal standard. And that's where we're going with it. I was actually in Europe last May at the Connectathon and WGM to let people know that, hey, yes, we're actually doing this. We're bringing it universal, because with the European Health Data System, with all of these national networks being created in Australia and around the world, they all need security that scales. And it's, there is references on Smart on Fire. They reach out to the RFC and say, hey, if you want to do it, use this RFC. But we've gone and done the work and made it so that, hey, just plug this in, and the developers are doing it. We have all the major vendors for EHR systems incorporating fast security now. We have major vendors who do just the auth frameworks incorporating it. So it's time to actually say, hey, if you're doing one-on-one, use Smart. It's wonderful. It does a great job. If you're setting up a network And whether it's a payer network or a provider network or a national network, you can use a scalable software that takes your hands out of it, frees up your team to stop responding to emails saying, yes, we reviewed you, here's your client ID, to make it scale. And that's, once again, going to Europe. I'm going to Rotterdam in May. I've heard it's lovely. I've yet to be there, but I'm going there anyway. And once again, I'm going to brag like crazy that we've solved a problem that I've been working on as part of that, before my time as technical director, as part of the security group for the last 5 years. And it's ready for the world, and the world is very much ready for it.
Yeah, and a lot of the organizations that have implemented it so far, a lot of them are international organizations, Meditech included, right? Like we want to use this in Canada, UK, Europe, you know, even Australia, right? So like as we branch out with other parts of our system, right? Like having this, agnostic industry standard worldwide, is very beneficial to all of us.
And Meditech was the first one to implement it, all the vendors, and we're really proud of our partnership with them to get them, you know, showing us exactly how much and how little it takes to actually implement it. We were surprised. I think you originally said it took you 8 weeks to get a proof of concept together.
Yeah, like I said, it was a lot faster because a lot of times it's just taking things that we already had. We already had certificate verification. We already had OAuth. We already had Smart. Start putting all those together, and our proof of concept and our showing up to our first connectathon with it was a lot faster than we anticipated.
That's great. I always hear when I hear like of like really future proof EHRs and like EHRs that are always like on top of the latest standards. Like Meditech is like one of the top ones I think always comes up. And the international angle is kind of interesting because I think when you travel, you go to an ATM or you buy plane tickets or you all of these networks have set up and you can use your debit card anywhere in the world, right? Pretty much if they have a ATM there. Or let's say your credit card, and I was in Portugal in last October, and boom, they take all the credit cards that I have in my wallet, whatever it is, because they're all part of the same network, right? So I think ultimately it's kind of funny how healthcare's kind of following the track, although it's a lot more complicated. We had this conversation with, Brian Keeler and other folks last year when we were like trying to look at the plaid example, and we were like, well, why doesn't healthcare have plaid? Well, I think we're getting close to pretty much having plaid, right? And then the next question would be, oh, why don't we have an international financial system for healthcare, right? And I think that this is what it really enables. And I want to touch on the technical a little bit more on the UDAP and like how it's really different from OAuth. So basically, if I'm correct, OAuth is basically saying like who you are and what permission you have, what you can do. And then UDAP adds, hey, prove cryptographically that your organization is who it claims to be. Am I correct in that?
Yeah. And OAuth, the basic OAuth is a simple flow, right? It's authentication. Hey, I'm Dave Pyke. This is my password, and authorization. I can access Google Maps to search for my house because it's already know where my house and my work is because I put them in there. Very simple, very straightforward. There's a lot more to it, right? They're generating tokens. They're creating, a secure workflow. They may integrate encryption into all of it. But the basic workflow is very simple. I am who I say I am. I know because I have a username and password, or I've touched the fingerprint scanner on my laptop, and therefore I have access. And that works for so many things. I mean, you get two-factor if you're going into your bank. At least I hope you have two-factor if you go into your bank. And that's great. But when you want to exchange PHI, personal health information, you need a lot more, right? We need to make sure that the foreign system that is connecting, whether it is, of my phone connecting through, Apple Health, or it is two EHRs connecting to each other, we need to make sure that they're going to have agreed to be good citizens on the network. We need to make sure that they are who they say they are. We need to make sure that, they've agreed to all the policies, all of this. So we do that through NX509 certificate. Right? A centralized authority becomes a certificate authority. Once you have signed, and for TEFCA, I'll use that as an example, you sign the terms of participation, you get your certificate saying, yes, you're allowed to do FHIR. That certificate plus the software statement, which is outlined as part of the RFC and we profiled within, says, okay, this is the organization. This is what they're likely to do. This is all the information about them. That all gets put into a JSON structure, submitted with this certificate, signed by their certificate, and that becomes the registration. Now, in normal OAuth, if you're hooking two systems together, that is a manual process. I send an email, hi, I'm Dave. I run this system. I would like to access your system. Here's some basic information about me. We go through, we do a risk analysis, we do all kinds of things to get you through that. This could take anything from hours to years. And then you get that client ID, right? And straight alphanumeric code says, yes, I think you are who you say you are. That's nice. But if we can eliminate most of that, if we can say, okay, you're going to go on this network, again, pair network, provider network, national network, it doesn't matter. But you have agreed to all of these policies and you agreed to be a good. So we're just getting a certificate, which you can use with everyone on the network, right? So you take that same software statement that we talked about earlier with that same certificate, and anybody on the network will accept that as, okay, they're a good citizen. We're going to give them a client ID automated. So in seconds or less, you get your client ID, which then you take through a normal OAuth workflow. Again, we extend it. More information can be done through extensions. That's part of the OAuth standard, but really not profiled. We've done that so that we can say, okay, now we need to know who the user is. Now we need to know what their role code is. All of these things to get authentication. And next step, authorization. They are who they say they are. They're this type of organization. They can read clinical information. They can read claims information, that kind of thing. So you end up with a much stronger, secure system that's based on trust, not just because, hey, they say they come from this hospital, but trust because we know they've signed contracts, and if they do anything incorrect, they get nailed to a tree, and we'll accept that and let them go through and have access to all the data in our system. And everybody can say that without having to go through risk analysis because it's been done.
Yeah, it's really just taking that, dynamic client registration as part of UDAP, adding the, you said cryptographic,
Cryptographic.
cryptography. There you go. Piece to that, and now you can use that in a secure manner and get that client. And I think that's the big piece, right? It's like you eliminate that human, which is, smart is great, but it's got that human element. And if we're going to scale, we got to remove that human element. The first and only way I've seen so far is how to do that.
Yeah, so we're not talking about getting rid of Smart on Fire. We're not talking about replacing it. We're just talking about like, okay, the next evolution, going from your, AOL dial-up connection to a broadband connection. Like you got to enable that kind of. So, LLMs and AI, I think one of the big things that people talk about is trust, right? So how do you know, is AI a trusted actor? Are you thinking as part of this fast security framework, essentially, how do you give AI permission to access either on behalf of their organization or on behalf of a patient in a similar manner, right?
AI would just be another user, right? I'm going to trust that this hospital system has signed the agreements. They're going to play nice. That AI would just be listed as the user. So when they go, they're authenticated. It's ChatGPT 16.3. They're going to ask for this information based on this use case. They're going to ask for these smart scopes, right? So they'll ask for patient observation and so on. They will have probably a specific purpose of use code and, AI interpretation. So that way everybody knows where that data is going, because that's the biggest concern is who's getting the data. What are they going to do with it? And if you're training an AI, you really want to know for sure exactly what they're going to do.
Yeah. So you're thinking like it's really no different than any player requesting access from an organization, and there has to be a approval flow and logging and
Yeah.
delegation, all of that. That the organization has to make sure that if they give AI access to their network access on behalf of them, then they have to have the auditing, governance, all of that stuff enabled, right? So you can't just like boom, go just retrieve any data you want based on any query, right? Like that's probably not gonna.
Right. It's still gonna have to have the same like rules of the road, right? But like AI could play multiple different roles too, right? It could be like a secondary use, right? Like, okay, I got it for treatment business to business, B2B, like I always do. But then AI was able to use it, right? Okay, this is the same idea as accessing it for an app, right? But AI is the app, and you just gotta give credentials to AI, but like that AI agent is maybe just a node on the network. And I think that's where you kind of figure out is like, okay, what role is this AI agent playing? And then assigning that through the certificate, through the subject alternative name and purpose of uses. And now you know exactly who that is. And if we need to have different purposes of uses for AI versus others, we could look at that. But like it should be crazy different, right? It should be very similar with maybe just a caveat here or there, or maybe it's the exact same, because it's not always that different between like if an AI agent gets the data or another computer that's not AI but still machine getting the data. Is it that different? In most cases, it's probably not.
Yeah. I mean, we've been doing analysis on data, creating cohorts and all kinds of things with data in the HR systems and HIE systems for, 10, 15 years. AI is just a hopefully smarter way of doing that.
Um,
You hear us?
it's great when you have kids and they walk into your office and they start doing stuff that they're not supposed to.
Yeah, you get used to it after a decade or two.
I just sent a text to my son. I was like, when you get home, like stay out of the office. I don't need you in the recording.
Decided to take the iPads away today. So it's like a no iPad day or whatever. And of course, that's like danger zone. So anyway, Jason, how old are your kids?
I have a 15-year-old daughter and a soon-to-be 12-year-old son. One is home already. The other one is biking home and is expected to arrive any minute here.
So at any minute, you're going to hear, I'm home at the top of their
Yeah.
voice.
They'll
Usually
like
they don't do that. You'll
vaults
hear a
in,
loud slam of the door. They might like
turn
walk
on my
by.
iPad. Yeah. Uh, yeah, so I have two boys, 10 and 12. So pretty much, yeah,
I got
same.
two girls, 16 and 14. So I think we're all in the
Okay.
same boat.
Same boat. Yeah. Lock your office. I think that's the takeaway there. Make sure you have a lock on your office. And then you have headphones so that you can like, doesn't matter if they start banging on the door, you can like ignore them. Yeah. So I had a chance to watch the CMS Aligned Networks beam that was rather CMS Health Ecosystem stream with Amy Gleason and all the companies, and everybody was kind of participating. Last year, I had Jill DeGraff on this podcast, like I think it was a year ago, right before this whole thing started. And we started talking about it. I was like, what is it? Like, what are we trying to do? So now it kind of all comes into view. And honestly, I'm pretty impressed in like the progress that's happening there. Jason, do you want to talk about it a little bit? Like, I saw you are working on stuff there with multiple different areas. One of them is like Josh Mandel, and I am a friend of the ecosystem, whatever they're calling it, patient caregiver or whatever. And so I've been like kind of looking into all the different groups and all the conversations I have, and I'm like, this is great. This is like a connect-a-thon that's like just an ongoing connect-a-thon that people are working together, which is what I think everyone wanted for a long time. But at the same time, like, what is your kind of thought about that right now?
Yeah. I mean, I think to paraphrase a little bit, sometimes it's a little bit of controlled chaos. I think we're all moving in the direction that we want to move. I think sometimes like what the goals are kind of shift here and there slightly. And I think that's where like everyone has their heart in the right place, but we don't always agree on what we're going to do that. And I think that's where like as we move in from kind of like the initial push for March 31st, and now we start looking at July 4th. Now it's really saying like, how can we solidify and all agree on the standard to do that, right? Like we created a small little working group now that's just going to say, okay, there's a couple different ways to take an OIDC token that was given by the certified, the CSP, and now it's like,
Credential
okay, what do
service
we
provider.
credential service provider. But what do we do with that? How do we do that? Is that should that be in the authorization workflow type thing that you put that in and it's a full or hopefully a full replacement of the authentication piece? Some people kind of said, okay, well, I have an OIDC token, can I use like a jot bearer token exchange type workflow, and like that has some merits too, right? Like other ones are like, well, can we use client credential CRAN and we just send you those things? So now it's like, how do we modify that? But unfortunately, a lot of that still kind of says, okay, let's assume registration has been done. And I think that's where, from that standpoint for fast, like we're still trying to say like, okay, we have a solution here. Tefka's, is going towards this. Other people are going to that. Like, why can we not just say like that's going to be the standard? And we'll figure out who issues certificates. Is that a role that CMS could play, or can that come from the directory somehow, or something like that, right? And then on the flip side of that, right, for the other pieces, now it's talking about, okay, what is the role of consent in that workflow, and what's the definition of consent, because that sometimes is hard, and the role of authorization, right? Like, is there a difference between consent and authorization? Which I think for a lot of times there is a difference, but there is overlap there. So now it's our job in FAST to help facilitate that. Like we we have a directory IG that they're helping use. We have a consent IG that we're helping to inform the group about, as well as in security. So like it is controlled chaos, but at least the chaos is all pointed in the right direction. And it has been very engaging and very moving quickly, and creating more advancement faster, which has been great. Now we just need to centralize that and all agree on what that advancement should look like. And I think that's going to be like kind of the next big phase there, is to get everybody consolidated to one line moving in the right direction, because we all agree that's the same line that we should go in.
Very interesting. And do you feel like does AI have a big part to play in that, just because you can like, is it the fact that you can now like create a solution, game it out, and just see how it works really quickly and like prototype things really quickly? Or is it just the fact that you have all these people in the room and you can discuss these different pathways in terms of what needs to happen to enable like the end goal that everybody kind of agrees on?
Yeah, I mean, I think having everybody in the room, right? Everybody wants to be in the room where it happens, and we're making that piece come true. But I think on the AI perspective, though, it's like, okay, one, like the kill the clipboard initiative, right? Like one of the pieces of that was, can I use a QR scanner to ingest this document into the EHR system, right? So for us, like, okay, well, we have different tools that we could do with that already. We have some fire document reference write pieces that somebody could have wrote right into us, but the industry wasn't ready for that. So we were able to use AI, right, to basically write a quick QR scanning app, which you kind of saw in the demonstrations last Thursday. And we were able to use AI to help generate that. And that took a development project or prototype that used to take multiple weeks down to a couple days. We still have some enhancements to do it, but like that, I think, is where the AI really fits in, is to say, okay, well, I have this idea that we all kind of agreed to try. Now utilize AI to help create that prototype faster, to help increase that initiative and the quickness of that.
I just have a quick question on like kill the clipboard. So to me, it's like, it's a great initiative, and I think it'll solve a lot of problems for, when you're going to a new health system or a new provider, right? Let's say you're an existing provider. Does that create duplication? Like, if I'm bringing it to my existing health system that technically already has Epic or Meditech, and they have my data, just this provider, but I'm going to give them my QR code just to check in and do all that flow. So is there like considerations about like, how do we make sure that there's not creating like redundant data and like making the situation worse from a data quality perspective and all the other stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think initially, right, the way we're going it's more of like, hey, here's an additional view, right? Like if we bring it back to just kind of core interoperability for a second, right? Like we've done a lot of things with document exchange. You kind of pop up a document, it's got a lot of information in there. The clinicians can kind of review that. There's certain pieces, problems, meds, allergies, maybe immunizations, maybe a little bit more that you kind of discreetly pull out and you put in the chart. And now it's like, what is that same role for a patient mediated document? Okay, initially, I think a lot of us are saying, okay, let's view it. They have another piece of information that they can add to their equation, right? To say, okay, how do I treat this patient? Okay, here's what I'm seeing from the networks. Here's the patient story, which I think is an important story, right? Okay, now mentally, I put all those together, and we can create that solution there. I think after that, that's where we really start to get into the like, okay, how could AI help us do that? I have 5 problems I got from my patient. I have 25 problems I got from the network that have some duplication in them. and are fully duplicated on this side of these 5 and these 25. Okay, well, AI can maybe put those together and now say, okay, well, this was from the patient, but it was verified from the network over here, where it's, I have that same problem, like that's a verified problem, it's a verified allergy, those types of things. And now I think that's where it goes next for the killer clipboard. So like, okay, we have a PDF. Okay, as we get into IPS, international patient summaries, JSON bundles, Fire bundles. Now what happens, right? How discrete can we get? But also on the flip side is what data does the organization need so that we make sure we put that in the summary too, right? Like if they're looking for, past medical, but they also have like these questionnaire pieces that they're looking for, can we make sure to either populate the app or the app's node always ask those so that we can like bring those back in discreetly? Because like the real key to kill the clipboard is to kill both clipboards, right? Both the physical one that you'd want it to write on, you don't have to anymore, but also the digital one, right? Like I shouldn't have to always copy and paste everything from the PDF over. And I think that's the next evolution of that. Is like, how do
Right.
we kill the next part of the clipboard, of that digital clipboard that's on your computer as you're copying and pasting things across from the PDF.
Yeah.
I've been talking about my experience with the colonoscopy I had last year and the fact that I needed to go fill out a 46-page document to retype all of my medical history because the EHR that they're honestly the biggest gastro provider in the Western PA area for some reason is not interfacing with any of the EMR systems, like at all. So like all they send you is a Word document that you have to like retype. So I'm like, okay, this is like not cool. And I'm thinking that's like a perfect solution for that, right? You just bring him and then boom, you guys scan this thing and then you got all my history. The problem is like where are they gonna put it? But well, there should be like a open source tool that they can just like stand up and be like, boom, you're
Yeah.
done.
I mean, a lot of systems have a way, if you brought that as a piece of paper, right? You brought that as 13 pieces of paper, they'll scan that in as one and make it a PDF, right?
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
a lot of systems have a landing
No,
spot for that.
these guys wouldn't even give you an appointment until you filled out the form and press submit. Then they have to schedule. Yeah. So it was fun. And guess what? The scheduling took a week and I was in the queue with like 49 other people. And like you basically every time you call, they tell you where you are in the queue. And then they call you back after that at some point, and then I missed the call. So I was in the queue and I missed the call. So like literally, like I've never experienced anything like that. But apparently, like there's such a shortage of like whatever gastro practice and physician, like they can do whatever they want because you know what, they have the volume and they're making money and whatever. So I think that's like a lot of the way healthcare practice. But like anyway, so but I think actually like the kill clipboard is like really interesting because like now that patients can be empowered with their own AI and AI agents. And I've been prototyping my own like open claw agent and that can do stuff. So I can actually maybe like create a QR code and say like, hey, open claw, like send all this stuff to my provider that I gathered from all these other sources that they don't even know about, right? And I know they're not pulling my data, right? But I can pull my data and I can give it to them. So I think like that may be one of those like use cases where like patient has they have a desire to provide their provider with all of their data because that's um their healthcare, right? So
Yeah.
And if you've got an individual access services provider, so somebody who has a personalized provider for you, and you combine that with smart health links, right? Which is an up and coming standard where you literally just give somebody, here's a link to the data, you go, pull it, and it may or may not be behind a basket, depends on how you set it up. But that will simplify a lot of this so that even if they don't have an EHR that's connected to care quality and TEFCA and Commonwealth and their, like local HIE, they can get their whole record because you already got it. You've already fetched it from everywhere, put it in one place, and just send them a link, and away we go.
Yeah. And I think that's where, like, I was talking with Josh Mandel, been chatting with him the last couple of days about Kill the Clipboard a little bit. And like one of the things I asked him about is, okay, well, we have the ability with, fast security and other mechanisms to get tokens, right? To do these things. Like, why don't we start facilitating some rights? Okay, you have a PDF document. Why don't we just write that into the system? Because you can probably write that in 3 days, 5 days, maybe before you even show up for your appointment. So that gives the clinician, the nurse, whomever, time to also work through that information and get that into your chart. So when you actually show up, it's not the first time they're seeing that data, right? Like you don't want to come in and like go to the registration and check in, scan your QR code, and now that's the first time they're seeing that data. They may not have the full time to incorporate that in, both physically and mentally, for that. So like, how can we utilize different purposes of uses, maybe even some certifications that come in as part of the fast security IG to say, okay, not only is this app trusted, this app's also trusted to like write data in or other things like that. And I think that's where some of the security mechanisms and some of the industry standards can start to really rally around. Like we know it's going to be patient mediated. We know it's coming from the patient. So we can have a very specific workflow to say, okay, it goes in this bucket in the chart and it comes in this way. And this is what we can do with that. And like, that's where, the fun part, if there's fun part about some of this controlled chaos is like these things are starting to be explored now a little bit faster than they have previously, right? Because people are very interested in that. And you bring a good idea up to the community, the community is ready to say, oh, let's go try that out. And it's really spurring that innovation.
Okay. So just to maybe like finish up in terms of fast security, where in the future, where do you think fast security is headed? But also like there's consent, right? There's provider directory, which I saw they just released provider directory data today, and I had my Claude Code download all 4 GB of it, which is amazing what you can do now. It's just like it does it for you. So like, yeah, where do you think it's all headed?
World domination, very simply. No, we've been really lucky that we've been working on these things for 7 years now to try to solve the problem that people have recognized and are now looking at us to do it. So beyond fast security, it's adoption by TEFCA, it's adoption by a number of organizations. We have our National Provider Directory, our NDH, which is the template for exchange that's going to happen for the CMS National Directory. We've been working with them side by side to, create a specification they can use and everybody can use to interface with it. So as you see CMS build up this directory, and hopefully it becomes the one true directory that we've been promised all these years, fast security is right there. You put digital identity. We've been talking, the digital identity CMS work group has been talking about, hey, we need just one, right? We can't have the government issue us an identifier. They've been prohibited to do that since the dawn of time. So let's go to industry. And so we're working with the Caring Group to create that one true identity, the golden record, with an identifier that can be used right across healthcare. So when you walk in, you don't have to say, hi, I'm Dave Pyke. I live at this address. I live in this city. I'm born in this state. And on page 2, I'll then continue. You walk in, show them a QR code, show them something. They pull you up from the credential service providers like IDMeet, like Clear, like login.gov. And that means automatically they know who you are. They have your demographics, and they can pull up your record right across the country. So anywhere that's been incorporated, that identifier becomes part of your record. And we stop with demographic matching, which, as we know, is perfect. Nothing can go wrong with demographic matching. And then to throw on top of all this, we've been working on federated consent, really trying to fix the problem that, well, anybody who's gone through a care journey knows they sign their consent 12 times per day, right? Every time you go into here's your 4 forms, fill that out. We're going to type those into a computer. That computer will interface with the EHR record. That EHR record will interface with it. That's dumb. We need to make it so that you set up your preferences of who I'm going to share my data with, treatment preferences, all this once. And then when you go to your next step, say, no, I'm not filling in your silly form. You go there, you get my preferences, we'll quickly bring them up on screen, make sure you're okay with them, I'm okay with them, update them as necessary, and away we go. So you're seeing this. You're seeing it in California where they've made, the three QIOs into consent repositories. Somebody's just calling your name. That needs to be, that can incorporate ours so that it goes right across. So everywhere that you go in your care journey, you know exactly what can be shared, and so do they. And that's what we're working on right now. We also have trying to figure out a new way to do testing, but that's in its very early stages because testing is something that's been the same for 1,000 years. It's time to fix that too. So yeah, shortly, world domination.
Fix testing. Just give everybody a Claude Code account, right? and just be
There we
like,
go. That'll solve
everybody
it.
gets a Cloud Code Pro, whatever it is. I pay $100 a month. It's like,
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, I think for the industry right now, it's about adoption and iteration. I think that's where people are really starting to say, okay, we've been stuck in this problem for a long time, and we haven't really tried to innovate. And now I think people are being forced to innovate. And I think we in the fast community are going to see an uptake on implementation. If you want to be in fire, you want to do fire Tefka, you have to do fast security. If you want to play in the CMS network, you're going to have to do fast directory. Fast consent probably is coming along. We have an identity IG as well that can help facilitate these things. And I think that's where like we're going to get that adoption, just like the CMS directory, right, is adopting our specification. They're giving us direct feedback to that. We're working through that. We're putting that in the next version of the IG. And I think that's going to happen for a lot of our implementation guys, is we're going to get that direct feedback. We're seeing it in the fast security one already. Okay, we have a digital identity from a CSP. How do we exchange that? Is there a standard way we can put in the fast IG to help facilitate that? Other advancements around certificate management and other ways to sign things to make sure that like the issuer of the client that was issued the OIDC token is the same client that's asking you to use that to find the identity. And it's just those things. It's ways to take our baseline that we had and those rules and now make them even more secure by saying like, okay, we can help facilitate this exchange. We can do it at scale. We can do it in a very trusted manner. And here's maybe a few more things that allow us to help. And I think that's what I'm really seeing right now, is that kind of everyone's implementing it now and we're getting a lot of great feedback cycles. And I hope that continues here in 2026 so that we can continue to iterate and make these implementations as good as they can be and as secure as they can be.
and maybe we can even get payers on board, and we can get pharmacies on board, right?
It's
So
Yeah,
coming.
it's
I've
coming.
talked with
I heard it.
Pooja, and like pharmacies in its own world, and it's kind of like there's a lot of opportunity there because pharmacy can unlock a lot of a lot of friction we have in the healthcare system. Like you go see your pharmacist like every week, right? So how can we get that data to the pharmacist? How we do this securely, right?
On the payer side, there is a lot of conversations that I've had about the fast security model, right? Because they were looking for in what is this, Atrix, I think, in one of the Da Vinci standards, that they had like 3 or 4 different ways to like do security. And, mutual TLS isn't exactly what most people want to use anymore. So besides going and getting clients everywhere, like, one by one, they really started to gravitate towards the fast security client ID, client assertion model to say, hey, this actually might be the best for us. While we don't quite have payer networks yet, let's move towards that, because I think that's going to be the easiest way for them to scale as well. Because they don't want to go and give every provider organization a client ID in secret, right? They want to have one way to say, you need a client from us, here's the process, and off they go. And I think that's the key here is, reuse of the standard. And I think it's applicable regardless of what purpose of use you're having, whether that's payer, operations, public health, even legal, right? Like there's a way to do all of this, and fast security helps it scale. And the other fast IGs help create the whole ecosystem. And that's really what the Fire at Scale task force was, right? Like how do we make this scale across all these different pieces so that we can do it in a lot more seamless and a lot more, onboard once, get it all, which I think is what we're all really after, is that onboard once.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining this conversation, gentlemen. Amazing work. Obviously, both of you are doing a lot of incredible progress. I think if you think about the last like 12 months, I think we've made like a lot of things that people have been talking about, and it's just exciting to see. But at the same time, like I think like in our everyday lives with AI and everything else that's happening, it's pretty incredible. So thank you very much for hopping on. I enjoyed this conversation. Are you both going to be at Dev Days in June?
Unfortunately not. My travel budget's running low, having to go to Europe, so I'm gonna miss Dev Days.
You picked going to Europe versus going to Minneapolis. Come on.
I
It's
know, right?
it's
Who
just as
who would want
nice.
to go to Rotterdam over Minneapolis
It's just
in
as
this time of
nice.
year? It's equally nice. Everybody in Minneapolis is wonderful. I'll be in Rotterdam. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll be in Rotterdam. We're scheduled to go to Dev Days. I don't know if it's going to be me specifically, but Minneapolis is in my backyard. The 30-minute drive downtown is a little bit more manageable in the budget because I don't have to, get a hotel or anything. So that's definitely helpful. So I do anticipate being there for that. And then, I think the next planetary firework group is, in Maryland outside of DC in the spring or in the fall, I mean. So I'll definitely be around. CMS Connectathon in July. Just lots of fun things to do all year.
Yeah, that's always fun. And we're looking forward to the CMS ecosystem is going to be also going live in July, right? Like July is the actual deadline.
Apparently.
Deadline
It's the
was for all that.
next wave.
Yeah.
Next wave is we're starting to call it like the July wave. So like,
Yeah.
what are the July requirements now? And we'll see how this all goes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Awesome. Well, take care, gentlemen. Thank you so much
care.
for
Thank you very much.
joining.
Thank you.